Russia-Ukraine war at a glance, what we know on day 259 of the invasion. Volodymyr Zelensky said his forces would not yield a single centimeter in fighting for control of eastern Donetsk region after earlier insisting that restoration of Ukrainian territory and compensation from Russia were conditions under which peace talks could take place. The activity of the occupiers remains at an extremely high level, dozens of attacks every day, Zelensky said. They are suffering extraordinarily high losses. But the order remains the same to advance on the administrative boundary of Donetsk region. We will not yield a single centimeter of our land. The Ukrainian president said about 4 million people were without power in 14 regions, plus the capital, Kyiv, but on a stabilization rather than an emergency basis. Russian missile and drone attacks have targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure for weeks as winter approaches, when temperatures can drop as low as -20 C. The Ukrainian military accused Russian troops of continuing to loot and destroy infrastructure in Kherson, where a showdown has been looming for weeks in the only regional capital Russia has captured since its invasion. On 7 November, a convoy of trucks passed over the dam of the Kakhovka hydroelectric station, loaded with home appliances and building materials, a statement said. Russian forces were dismantling mobile phone towers and taking away equipment, it said. Britain's Ministry of Defense said Russia was preparing new fortified lines deep inside territory it controls to forestall any rapid Ukrainian advances in the event of breakthroughs. This involved installing concrete barriers known as Dragon's Teeth to stop tanks, including near Mariupol in the south, to help safeguard Russia's land bridge to occupied Crimea even if Moscow loses other territory. Zelensky called on Tuesday for an extension to the Black Sea grain export deal that lifted a Russian blockade of 3 major Ukrainian ports and eased a global food crisis. The accord, brokered by Turkey and the UN in July, expires on 19 November, and looked in jeopardy in October when Russia briefly suspended its participation before rejoining. Ukraine also wanted the grain export deal expanded to include more ports and goods, and hoped a decision to renew the pact for at least a year would be taken next week, the deputy infrastructure minister said in a Reuters interview. Pro-Kremlin forces in Russia are hoping that the Republicans win control of Congress, an outcome they believe could mean the Democratic president, Joe Biden, finds it harder to get military aid packages for Ukraine approved. But for now, few in Moscow expect the bipartisan U.S. political consensus on Ukraine to crack, whatever the result of Tuesday's midterm elections. Zelensky urged the U.S. to stay united in its support and for U.S. politicians to maintain unwavering unity and follow Ukraine's example until peace is restored. The U.S. and Russia will soon hold talks on resuming suspended nuclear arms control inspections that had been put on hold during the COVID-19 pandemic and languished after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the State Department spokesman, Ned Price, said. Negotiations on the inspections would take place in the near future under the terms of the New START treaty, and would not include any discussion of the conflict in Ukraine. Zelensky has told world leaders they will not be able to tackle the climate crisis unless Russia's invasion of his country ends. There can be no effective climate policy without the peace, he said in a video address at the COP27 and Climate Summit in Egypt. The Russian President, Vladimir Putin, will join next week's G20 summit if the situation is possible, his Indonesian counterpart, Joko Widodo, who is hosting the meeting, said on Tuesday, adding that Putin could attend virtually instead. On Monday, the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, said Putin would decide by the end of the week whether he would attend. Zelensky will take part in the G20 meeting in Bali, most probably attending virtually, his spokesman has told Suspiln, the Ukrainian public broadcaster. Previously, the Ukrainian position was that Zelensky would not appear if Putin did. Reuters and Associated Press contributed to this report.